Welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast, where we explore the game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance and well-being in the workplace. If you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business, if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber, and if you want to be part of a revolution in human potential, then join us to discover the powerful resource that lives before our psychology.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. Now, today's episode, a little bit different because I've got two guests. Normally I have one, so special treat today. And we're here to talk about a new book. But before that, let me introduce my guests to the show. One is a regular, Helen Amery. She's been on the show 3-4 times probably. And the other guest is Sara Priestley, who is the co-author of the new book. So Helen and Sara, welcome to the show. And can we start with you just giving listeners a minute or two about your backgrounds? Helen, firstly, to remind people, and Sara, because you're new to the show, and then we'll get and talk about this exciting new book that we want to explore.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Piers. Thanks for having us on. So very potted history then, for those who haven't listened to the previous episodes, going from corporate HR into psychology-based coaching, into discovering Piers and working together one-to-one. So that was 3 of our episodes, was my transformation journey back in 2018. And then this becoming my work. So with increasing depth and increasing understanding and increasing clarity, I guess, of how I want to share that with people. And I remember you said, Piers, actually, in the very early days of us working together, how this exploration is infinite. And part of me, actually, my heart sank a bit at that, going, oh, really? There's not going to be an end point in a certificate that tells me I've made it. But in fact, it is infinite, and it's beautifully infinite, because each time you see something more deeply, it's like, oh, wow, it's even nicer, it's even easier, it's even better. So yeah, so that's where my experience is now, and hence getting to this point of this book, which obviously we'll talk about more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Well, welcome back. Pleasure to have you. And a new introduction to Sara.
Right. It's quite funny. I get asked to write bios or introduce myself all the time, and they're always different. I like Helen. I started in a corporate career. I was in consulting, big international, tiny corner shop boutique, and then a long career in corporate IT, which teaches you a hell of a lot about how businesses work. But one of the things I wanted even then was for people to be happier. I had one excellent support guy. He never fixed a thing, but he made people feel great about them being broken. And he was way more popular than the guy who could fix things, but made people feel bad about what they were doing to break it. So eventually, I finally managed to wrangle redundancy at a beautiful point, just as I was doing an advanced massage course. And massage is great for helping people feel better for a few days, and 2 weeks later they're back with the same thing, and I got bored. And so I started to try to work out, well, why does this happen? And I moved sort of upstream into teaching Pilates, and that was great, apart from people do 1 or maybe 2 hours of Pilates a week, and 23 hours and 6 days a week they were doing exactly what they always did. And so I fell into coaching completely by accident, because literally people phoned me up and would say, will you coach me? And the first time I was like, I don't know. And by the third person, I was actually getting to the point where I could say, yes, I will do that. And this is how much it's going to cost. And so for me, it's been quite a joyful discovery for me as well, that this is the way that enables all kinds of effective, efficient, engaged ways of living.
And I think what's beautiful is that, because I've known you for a little while, Sara, how your understanding, grounding, and therefore coaching, like Helen, like mine, has evolved over the years to where we're at now, to talk about what you've now sort of encapsulated in the book, and how that is, if you're talking about going upstream from sort of massage to Pilates to coaching, you're getting quite upstream now. I don't know if there's anywhere else to go, but who knows? It's infinite. So so this is the moment we're at. So let's get into the book, because I really want to help listeners understand what this book could do for them, because for regular listeners who have been following along with Quality of Mind, I mean, occasionally we do little practical exercises on the podcast, but we're always sort of signposting, saying, well, go and listen to this, go and do that. But here now is a wonderful resource that I think if people actually explored, it would probably help them really see what we're talking about with the Quality of Mind podcast in general. So that's why I want to talk about it. So the book is called The Complete Book of Awakening. Now, why don't we start with the title, and you guys say, why did you call it that?
Yeah, so it actually began life, Piers, being called The Little Book of Awakening. And I had, because the idea had come to me first, and yes, so I had this idea of a little book, something that was compact and powerful and would give people key explorations to do for themselves, and would enable exactly what we've actually enabled with this book. And it was just purely through its evolution, as Sarah and I came together and we shaped and adjusted and added and recognized bits that were missing from a particular section, or it grew. And it was when so one of the things we did with the book was tested it with a live book group, because we didn't want to send this book into the world untested. We really wanted that rigor. Really all through the book is rigor. And so part of that process has been testing it with real actual people, both in that live book group and as independent test readers. And so we came towards the end of the live book group, and one of the readers said, "This is not a little book. This is a huge book." Huge because of the impact of it, huge because of the transformative potential within it. And so that was the point at which Sarah and I then said, okay, so what's the real name for this book? What is it really? And the word that felt right was complete, because it also, of course, brings in that sense of whole and wholeness, which is all there is. But it really is also complete, because and people have said this who've read it, it does take you on the complete journey. People consistently are saying it leaves no stone unturned. It's, it really is doing what it says on the tin.
And I also want to add on the downside of the word complete, which sometimes means big, heavy, too hard to read, too long. It's not that either, right? So just listeners, don't see complete and go, gosh, I don't want complete. I need like intro. No, this is so accessible. But let me ask you the other question then, the second half of the title. What is awakening?
Sarah, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah. I was going to say, complete is simply, for me, it's like, whilst you guys have talked about this being infinite, and that's lovely and expansive, but also it's kind of quite nice to go, oh, look, in the space of about 12 weeks, I can have worked through this, I can have seen it for myself, and I can be at the point where I'm ready to say, what does this mean in my life? It's not a traditional kind of some sort of esoteric apprenticeship where after 40 years of sweeping floors and cleaning toilets, you're initiated into the secret. This is something that we're putting front and center. And what we're putting front and center is awakening, which is a difficult word, but just because it's been misused a lot of places doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. And it simply means seeing reality as it is. It's as simple as opening your eyes, seeing reality as it is. And in life, in business, in relationships, if people saw reality as it was and started with reality as it is, most of their problems would really not be quite as problematic.
That does beg. We were debating, weren't we, before we press record, how deep we're going to go on this podcast, because it begs the question, well, am I not seeing reality as it is then?
Do you not think that most people see reality through all the filters of their conditioned beliefs that they've built up over a lifetime of who they need to be in the world, who they have to be acceptable, the labels that they acquired, which could start off as wonderful, positive affirmations. Like people used to tell me I was clever. That turned me into this degree collecting machine. Like my qualifications are boring. Like that's the level that they're at. Most of us live our lives through this filter of what we think we need, who we think we are, and what we think we need to be okay. And that sounds a bit harsh, but it's not that I'm saying you guys are like that. We've all done it. We've all been there. We've all tried to start from somewhere we're not.
And it always fascinates me how invisible that is, and still until you start to see it, i.e. awake, because the system seems to be very good at making that look like that's what it is, rather than stuff that we added in through conditioning. And I think that's the nature of the system. So with awakening, it's a reductive, subtractive strip. So when you say reality as it is, it's stripping back the conditioning we didn't even know we were sort of living in, and coming back to what the true essence of what we are, not even who we are, what we are. And then you see reality as it is from there. So it's a reductive, subtractive thing, isn't it? But it's so invisible to us. And the number of people, I'm sure you guys get this, that I work with and going, well, how did I not see this before? Or why were we not told? Or how come it's taken me decades to get there? So that's what, so awakening is pointing to sort of resetting the system, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Yeah. Just picking up on some of that, Piers, as well, that subtractive and that stripping away. What we've done in the book is look at that from both angles. So we've looked at it both, yes, the what isn't really me, these labels that Sarah just talked about, the things that we've believed we are, the ways we believe we have to be, the things we think we have to avoid, the things we think we have to pursue. We've stripped away this stuff, but we've not left people hanging. In fact, we purposefully structured the book beginning with what you've just said about what we really are or who we really are. We've started with the foundation of recognize that which you are, which you've always been. Let's start with a strong, stable base of that reality. And then let's look at all this stuff that we aren't really, but we've taken to be who we are. And we really recognize that this process is really a dance between both of those, always. But but you need both, really. And as Sarah said about, the old ways of doing this did involve being in communities where you had people around you who were there to support you if you were having an identity crisis. So we've written the book in the way it's written for that exact reason, that we don't want people to be having sudden falls out of reality, breaks from reality, identity collapse. We've done it in this way on purpose, to provide a solid ground, to provide step by step, again, which is feedback we've had from people who've read it. People feel really held and taken through the process step by step, very often saying, oh, the question I had at the end of that chapter was answered in the next one. It's
and that's the completeness. And I think also what I want to say, because a lot of where we target this podcast is people in organizations, the workplace, leadership, etc., business, and they might be thinking complete Book of Awakening with a swirly blue-green cover. That's not the kind of book I read, right? Now, I want to reassure listeners and potential readers of the book that what this book has done is it's democratized, it's made less esoteric, less strange Vedanta Tantra language and spiritualness. So you've despiritualized something that is fundamentally spiritual, which in quality of mind language we call before psychology, and made it as practical and as accessible. I mean, you don't need to know anything about awakening or spirituality or anything like that. You haven't had to have done a dot of yoga or been to an ashram or done anything like that. Anyone could pick this book up, and if they explore it in the right way, they will start to see what you're pointing to. So I think that is so refreshing. And dare I say, needed in this category.
In fact, the people who sometimes find this more simple, easier, aren't the people who've spent years trying to find peace of mind in a complicated yoga position in an ashram in India. They are the business person or the mother or the dog walker who pick it up, come into it really open and just go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it feels true. And when you said explore it in the right way, one of the things we embedded from the very beginning is I guess what you've talked about a lot, about the bridge from before psychology through psychology to actually doing stuff in the world. And that's been our model from the very beginning, that things have got to be true to somebody in introspection, in just self-reflection. It's got to be true at that level, but it's got to be true logically. So we've got to be able to extrapolate from that into, like, well, if that's true, then this. And then then this takes us into, so that means that I can use it in the world this way. I can see it in the world this way. And we don't talk about that horrible word paradox, because paradox just means an unexplored apparent contradiction, which in the rigorous sense that I have of pure science, that means there's something to explore. So we've looked all the way through at that logical bridge that makes something that could sound a bit too spiritual for normal life really, really practical.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing there. And what I've noticed in what I do in the work, if I think about it, is there's an element of what I call direct inquiry, which you call self-direct inquiry, where you explore your experience without belief system, just what in this moment appears. And that is taking away all of the learned concepts we have. And that would be inquiry. And we're not used to doing that. And it's a little unconventional to start with. But once you get into it, it's like, oh, I get this. But to start with, the thinking mind wants to come in and answer the questions. So that takes a little bit for people to start to see the direct inquiry. But once they start to see the direct inquiry, there is also what you were pointing to, Sarah, which is an element of let's join the logic back up now. Right. And that might be a reflection, which is different to, I think inquiry and reflection are different. So it's a reflection is kind of an insight on the form, an insight on my concepts, whereas direct inquiry is just sort of going before the concept. So I think that the book does this, you join the dots, if you like, from the direct inquiry piece, which is just, let's just see what we can see without belief system. And then what does that mean using the logic of the conceptual mind? Now, that's what occurs to me. Was that in your intent? It sounds like it was.
Yeah. It's something we've talked about in the book, is the 3 levels, if you like, of experience: conceptual, raw, and direct. And that order, I've just said them in: conceptual, raw, and direct, is generally how people are walking around in the world, starting with conceptual, starting with ideas, starting with beliefs. And that's what's we've called the muck on the lens, to seeing that you are already this awakeness. And what we're doing throughout the book the whole time is flipping that order. So we're bringing you back into direct experience, back into raw experience, and then the conceptual mind can come in. Then the logic can come in that can communicate this, that can make sense of it in this apparently dualistic world. So yeah, we absolutely, that's absolutely the intent of the book.
Can you, because I remember I asked you this question when I first got the manuscript of the book. Can you describe for listeners again the difference between direct and raw?
Yeah, so direct is what we can know without reference to anything. So without reference to any thoughts, without reference to any of the 5 senses, just known from, like, if you asked a 2-year-old, they would know without having to know anything, without having to learn anything. There's no requirement, there's no beliefs, it's just known. And then raw experience is our pure sensory experience. So that's the sights, the sounds, the sensations. And then there's conceptual. So what we tend to do is label the sensations and walk around with the label. So if I'm feeling angry, I'm walking around just going, God, I'm so angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. Whereas actually beneath that label, there's a bunch of physical sensations happening, which are being ignored in favor of the label, thinking that the label's somehow going to do something, solve something, change something. And that if I could just be angry enough, then I can surely make that person change their behavior. Whereas actually what we're inviting people to do is come beneath that, come back to what do you actually know right here, right now, in your raw and direct experience, going upstream, like you would talk about, because that is then, that's being with reality as it is. And then clarity comes, then different experiences come, then we might have a different understanding of what we were labeling anger before.
And that known word is a little trickster sometimes for people, because known is the first part of the word knowledge. So people think known means, oh yes, I know that, as in I know Paris is the capital of France, you know, and that's not what you mean by known, is it? So when you say in direct experience, which is before raw and before conceptual, just say a little bit about what you mean by known.
Yeah, Sarah, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, the thing about words is everybody has meanings that they've added to them, and we've tried to be as close as we can to common uses as words as we can. And aware and known are kind of useful words from that perspective. But you're right that most people, as soon as you ask if they're aware, they say aware of.
Yeah.
And they're immediately looking for another thing. And that's not surprising, because humans, you know, as humans, we relate. We do everything in relationship to the world, to other people, to our processes, our structures. But when we talk about this, it can kind of scare people. And I think that this is one of the reasons why there's been this kind of divide between, you know, the before psychology and the so-called real world, is because it can feel like, oh, without all that motivation pushing me on, I'm not going to get anywhere. So it can feel like we're taking away something that's essential. And I think that part of the book is to prove the things we thought were essential aren't, and the things we overlooked are essential. So when we come to that word know, it's the lightest possible use of it. It's saying that is something that you know about yourself that you never learnt, that you didn't see in a mirror, that you didn't read in a book, that nobody else ever told you. And you said there, oh, I know Paris is the capital of France. Like, show me the actual physical edge of France. That it's you know, it's one of those ancient jokes, is trying to map the coast of Norway as an example. The more you map a coastline, the ever increasing detail, that is an infinite task. It gets smaller and smaller. In space, there is literally no division. It's a political line on a map, the edge of France. It's a geographic label, and it's really useful, because if you want to go to Paris to have lunch for your birthday, you know, it really helps to know how to get there. And it really helps to use the same name that other people use for it, apart from the people who live there don't call it Paris, they call it Paris. So when you say, oh, but even that's a label, the things that you actually know, really know, that you did not pick up from somebody or something else, once we say this, promise you, this really is not going to leave you with nothing, this really is not going to leave you in this vacuous void, it does waken up, oh, there is a possibility there's something I know that I did not learn, like the extra bit, the knowledge. Let's take the ledge bit away. There is something I know, and it's tiny, it's simple, and that's why it gets overlooked. But it's what's in every single sentence that you start with. I know about this. We just bring it back to really to who we are. And when you talked about what we are, we bring it back to the fact that our core capability is to know experience, or we can even drop that word. Our core capability is to experience, and is to engage in that experience, whatever that experience is.
Yeah. And that's the bit to point to, which for a lot of people before they come across that doesn't sound like there's anything there. It's like, well, there can't be anything there. Everything's after that in a way. And another way of describing it, which may be helpful or unhelpful, is it's almost not an experience, because it's the bit that experience comes from, and it's inside every experience anyway. So you can't really find it separately, because it's merged and mingled in with us thinking, feeling, and perceiving, and we're just, I guess, trying to isolate it, just so well, that's the only bit that never comes and goes. That's the eternal bit. And at the lightest sense of the word, as you say, Sarah, you know that, or you're aware of that, or you sense that, or whatever. But the you that's sensing is also usually part of the experience as well, depending on which you were talking about. Anyway, so what the book, I think, does very nicely, as you say, it tells you, it unpicks what we think we are but we're not, and then it says, well, if you get rid of all of that, that's not some dystopian nihilist kind of, oh no, I need all that, otherwise what's the world going to do? No. What you truly are behind all that is wonderfulness, or the potential for wonderfulness, or peace, whatever. So you're not left with nothing. So you do the both sides of the coin, which I think is great. And in a way, some people who might know a little bit about this could start the book halfway through, right? I mean, I wouldn't suggest that for people who don't, because you could just start there. I think it would give some nice insights into what they've already experienced in non-duality and spirituality so far. So I think this book's for the total novice and newcomer, and for someone who's been banging around this for decades. Because the only thing you'd have to be, if you've been banging around this stuff for decades, I think simplicity is just such a, I always say this stuff's simple but not easy, but it's so simple, which is what makes it not easy. So it's best not to try to know, really, just come at it.
Come at it fresh. Yeah. And we've had feedback from both those groups, if you like, that you've talked about there. So we've had feedback from people who are brand new to it, who've said, wow, it is so accessible, it's so easy to access, and those who've been in an exploration. And like Sarah was talking about before, about the logic that this offers, it provides something which kind of felt uncertain before. Sometimes we can be in an exploration where it's like, oh yes, I have this sense that there's something lovely and full of potential and incredible, this something that's a nothing that I really am. But there can sometimes, and this was my experience, there was kind of a shakiness to that knowledge. There was do I really know it though? Have I just learned these words off the people I've been learning with or been coached by? And so what people who've been more practiced in this kind of exploration have said is that it fills in that gap for them. It kind of completes the puzzle, because it's like, oh, yes, this gives me a really unshakable recognition. I can actually see it for myself. I'm not having to rely on the person who says, you've got everything within you that you need. It's like, oh no, really? Yeah, really.
And I'm going to say one thing about that, you see, and we were joking before, it shouldn't really be a book, this, because you will get that from this book, but not if you read it like a book.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that is like a book you take on holiday and just flick through when or like a recipe book and just go, oh, that you need to actually do what the book says.
Yeah.
Or explore. I mean, or the audios that you've got, because that's where the rubber hits the road. Otherwise, it will just be some more words. They're nice words and they're clear words and they're not fancy words. They're not esoteric. They're great words. But and it might just sound really obvious and patronizing to say but really. And I think, I don't know what you find, but people nowadays are quite good at reading for gist.
Right.
And I always put I was doing a keynote yesterday and I put it at the beginning of it, I put a big sort of warning sign saying, don't listen for gist. I mean, it's fine, but you won't get anything out of it if you listen for gist.
Yeah.
You've got to get hold of the book. Number one, buy the book. That'll be important part of it. Then you've got to actually explore it. Yeah. And it's more of an explore than a read, isn't it? Would that be I don't know what language you would use, but you've got to give it a go.
No, absolutely that. And we set out with that intention of it being a workshop in a book.
Mm,
And again, which one of the original book group said. We hadn't said that to the group up front,
mm,
but a few weeks through, they were like, "Oh my God, this is like a workshop. This is like it's all contained in here. It's all it's all laid out step by step." So yes, it is. And I think to your point, you know, people can read it through and and they will get a gist, and either that's because that's all that's right for them right now, and then perhaps they'll come back to it later and go deeper. But yes, absolutely, the difference is when you genuinely engage and explore.
What would you say if someone starts reading it and gets a little bit of what I might call, that they might not spot it as this, is resistance? What would you sort of point to that? What would you say about that?
Well, that definitely happens. Some of our book group turned up certain weeks and said, "I don't like you anymore. You annoy me."
Well, that's making it quite personal.
Honest enough to say that. Not because we're talking that little bit before psychology, we are talking about our sense of identity. And when we've been very wedded to a lot of concepts and labels about who we are and what we're doing, it can feel like taking away the stuff that isn't essential, not taking it away totally, but just saying, you do know that's not essential to who you are, can feel like it's slightly threatening who you are. And that's why we've kept that balance all the way through. And when somebody hits a tiny bit of resistance, good, that's nice. It's like, it's actually a sign in itself of waking up. It's like, oh, I can really feel that. That annoys me. Like, how often in life do we get that feeling when we think, oh, that's a bad thing? This isn't about like massive anxiety. We're not talking about like existential crisis or midlife crisis. We're just saying, yeah, some of it will annoy you a little bit the first time through. That's okay.
I agree. For that kind of resistance, I was doing this keynote yesterday, and the question from the floor was, what? Always? 100%? You're saying 100% this is how it works? I'm like, yeah. They were like, oh, I'm not sure about that. Right. And you could tell it was a lovely piece of, like, they weren't like having a go. They were just like, whoa, hang on a minute. Now I'm listening. It was almost like, now you've got my attention. You're not just saying this is blah, 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 blah. You're saying this is how it works. Wow. Right. So there is that kind of resistance. But also I was thinking, when I was asking about the kind of resistance people might have to doing the direct inquiry in the way that you're suggesting, right? That people can, I mean, sometimes it's beautiful, isn't it? You do direct inquiry and you just fall into it. You dissolve and evaporate into it and you can lose time, and it's beautiful. And sometimes it's, I don't know, with direct inquiry, some people just go, well, I can't find it. I don't know what's going on. And you just keep saying the same thing, you know, that kind of resistance. Maybe that's just the way I do it. I get clients saying that sometimes. But what would you say about that if someone's trying to get into the direct inquiry way and they're just, they don't think they can do it? I don't know if I can do it properly, they might say. Am I doing it properly, this thing? What am I meant to find? You know, how would you answer that?
I would just reiterate what Sarah said. It's really the same thing. It's the attachment to the labels. It's attachment to the conceptual ideas. It's the attachment to what I think I already know. So quite often people have come up with questions around, oh, but the brain's doing this, or neuroscience says this, or no, my experience really does change in this situation. And it's like, yes, okay, and let's come back to what you know right now, because the resistance is just a factor of going off into the mind and off into stories and off into ideas. And it's, as was said before, that's how we've been trained. That's how society is currently primarily running. So it is a shift. It is, I think we said in the book, didn't we, Sarah, it's about exercising a muscle that we've not exercised. So the same as when you go to the gym and start lifting some weights, it feels uncomfortable. It doesn't mean it's wrong to do it. It just feels uncomfortable because you're doing something you've not been taught to do. It's not our society's way, and hopefully that's changing. But so that resistance is absolutely fine and perfect and great, because it's a normal part of the process. It's a normal part of shifting your identification back into who you are instead of into all the content. And so, yeah, resistance will come up. And it's, as Sarah said, it's not a problem. It's a great sign that this exploration is just rubbing up against something that you've attached to and identified as necessary in order for you to be okay.
Yeah, and even in this field, people build an idea of what they think direct experience is. Oh, it's going to be this bliss. It's going to be like a silent retreat on a mountaintop with the perfect food being served and the pool, and they have this idea of what it should be. Oh, it should be a spiritual experience. It should be religious. It should be blissful. It should be beautiful. All the colours should merge into a Monet style picture, or something like my background here, which is sort of that same blurry blues and colours, and I should love everybody unconditionally, and I should see my own kids no different to any other child in the world. And that's all stuff they've learnt about spirituality and religion. And the moment somebody tries to have somebody else's direct inquiry experience, it's not direct inquiry anymore.
And it's funny because the ones on the videos tend to be people who have had that, more of that experience. So, so their reference point is, oh, well, this person on the video is saying how they fell into bliss and all that kind of stuff. And that's the one maybe they've read about or seen to think, well, where's my that? And as you say, we're not saying that at all. That may happen for some people, who knows, you know, but it's not the point. Even if it did, that's not the point. The point isn't to have this isn't a way of getting a nicer experience. Ultimately in life that may happen, but the direct inquiry is not chasing a feeling or a contact high or a nice way to get to bliss. You're just exploring something. You're exploring this, what we are before: thought, perception, sensations, you know, feeling, etc. That's all you're doing. Not trying to find anything. Bliss is optional. Well, you know, symptomatic if it happens. But it's funny. You're right. It's what people think should happen when they read a book about awakening.
Yeah, and so we point to that over and over again in the book as well. We're very clear about it at the start, that the only goal is to recognize your essential nature. And the minute there's any kind of goal that says, but it should be feeling nicer by now, but I want a nicer life, but I want a bliss experience, any of that stuff, we've gone off into a different goal. And so it's always coming back to, no, just the exploration for the sake of the exploration.
So I'll ask you a question you probably wish you hadn't set me up to ask you. How do you know when you've reached your essential nature?
There's a settledness. There's an okayness.
And it's different for different people. Some people will be more ecstatic, and some people will be more peaceful, and some people will feel more energized, and some people will feel more relaxed. So we've tried to use that sort of settledness as a generic, trying to find we've used a lot of different words.
Yeah.
You know, and I had a long corporate career, and you know how people talk about holidays? You know, it's like, oh, I've got my holiday coming up, and I'm going to this mountain resort skiing, or I'm going to this beach, and it's going to be brilliant, and I'm going to relax, and I'm going to feel like myself again after all these work demands. What we're trying to bring to people is that sense of, oh, I feel like me again. Like being a 5-year-old again, but with all the knowledge and experience and skills and finances that you've built up over that time. And if somebody can go about their day-to-day life, business, whatever, with inbuilt sense of that, oh, I just feel like me again, that they have when they're on their holiday, on their mountaintop, whatever it is, then whilst that's not a goal, it is a marker. I was going to say side effect, but it's not. It's a marker. Quite often, and this is not just our opinion, this is the science of it, and that's why we provide one of the simplest measures. It's a 20-something question survey that you can do now, at the beginning of the book, at the end, at any point, and it measures that settledness or happiness or fundamental well-being at a really basic level. And it's not a goal, but it is a more or less consistent marker of that.
Yeah.
And it's not about relationships or external success. It's a very low level measurement, and people do have a better experience of life, not because life changes, but because they're engaging with it in a very real way.
And I think that's nicely put, because I think, it is a settledness. I think it's a good word, but there's an aliveness too. I mean, it's all different people, different words, but there's a feeling like of just is with life. But there's also that lovely sense of potential and like, well, sort of aliveness to be in life, whatever that might bring. So it's not a settled in, oh, I've settled, here I am, the sofa and me, we've settled. There's just a lovely knowing that you're being lived by nature, to use another phrase. And if I segue this into business now, so why do I talk so much to businesses about this, what you're pointing to in your book? Is it because it creates such the fertile ground to go into the world of business and the workplace without all your noise and baggage and striving. And what turns up from there isn't, oh yeah, well, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to go and live on top of a mountain. Is no, you engage with life and work and whatever your objectives are for your venture in a fresh, invigorated, inspired, connected, resilient, creative way. So it is the most perfect thing for the business world. And I've been noticing, and of course it's my own echo chamber, that people have been sort of spotting and waking up to that over the last 5-10 years. And there's a little bit of a dissatisfaction with what's currently going on. I mean, Helen, you mentioned, just someone posted on your thing on LinkedIn this morning about, they read the book and they're going, oh, right. Yeah. The current things aren't working so well. And maybe this book is pointing to a new way. And that's just a leadership coach who's obviously been around for a while, being sort of just, I guess, having to do with what they knew was available, but now there's something new to look at, and they're like, oh wow, could this be the new way?
And as he said, it's really making sense of something he kind of intuitively knew, that there was something about the way change management was being done or behavior management was being done, if something didn't feel right about it. And so the book is giving him that, again, that logic, that understanding, that direct experience of why it didn't feel right, and why his intuition was correct, that the often coercive or fear-based change and behavior change programs that we engage in, they're not in alignment with our essential nature. They're not in alignment with who we really are. And so, this book is consistently pointing us back to that and to why so many things have felt wrong in the world. But as you say, Piers, given we haven't had lots of people around us saying, oh yeah, look over here, this is why it's been feeling like that. Come and engage in this exploration, which will make sense of it all for you. We've not had that. And as you say, increasingly now, hopefully, but now that this is available and we can point people to it and go, there is something else, there is another way, and it's amazing.
And I think of those books that about, the ones about changing workplace culture, the ones that turned up on our desks from time to time. Who Moved My Cheese? Fish was my favourite, actually. I liked Fish a lot more than the cheese book. And somebody's trying to make me read a business development book at the moment. And it feels so much like going back to the dark ages of you need to have this mantra, and by the time you've done all the things you have to do, you'd probably be 80 and wondering how to apply them all. And what happens so often, or what has happened in the past, is some of those gentler business books, people have gone, oh yeah, that's a brilliant idea, I'm going to make my team do that. And so we're just taking the step before, and then a lot of the knowledge and skills and experience people have built up fall into place, and they're like, oh, now I get how I use that in a way that's not only more aligned with what works for me, but it's going to be more effective too. And that's kind of nice that we're creating this platform where a lot of the old stuff becomes really relevant in a new way.
Yes. And exactly. So it's not like you throw all the business tools and strategies and methodology out the window. they just come back with a new light. Oh, that's what that matrix is useful for, or that's what that process or thing is useful for. Yeah, I see that now, but you see it totally differently to before. To start with, it's like a shredding of everything, isn't there? There's sometimes a little bit of recalibration where you're just like, right, I don't want anything for the moment. I just want to get my mind to get clear. And then you come back and you start to see all your stuff differently. Most of them fall away, the tools and techniques and things, but the odd one, you're like, oh, I can sort of see this. And I think it's a new platform, as you say, Sarah. And I think there's your book is the start of a new breed. What yours and Catherine's, I'd say, self-worth leadership. I think she's been on the show a couple of times. It's a new way of looking at the business world from a very, very different start point. Now, what I would also urge listeners and potential readers to do is don't try and make this book additive to what you know already. You'll struggle with that. It won't really work. It will annoy you if you try to go, well, how's this fit with what I know? I would start from just don't know anything, the 6-year-old position, and look at it from there. And then later on, all the stuff you do know will come back in, as Sarah said. Okay, so we're going to try and make it a little bit of a shorter episode. So do you guys want to put a bow on this? What would you like to say to sort of wrap this up? What would you like to be your parting bow on this?
For me, it's feeling like reiterating what you've just said, Piers, around coming to it fresh, coming to it with a beginner's mind, coming to it without needing to fit it into what you already know. Now, I know when I started with you, I spent my whole first session pretty much saying, oh, this is like that psychological model, or the other side, or this leadership approach, and you very patiently were like, well, a bit, but no, a bit, but no. And so I'd invite people to just cut out that process. So the mind might do that. The mind might try and compare and try and fit this into what's already known. And so I guess the invitation then is to just recognize that that's happening, recognize that's not what's going to really make the biggest difference. And each time that's happening, it's just coming back to, okay, let's just come back to the book as it is. Let's come back to this exploration as it is. And just temporarily put down all that stuff I think I already know about leadership, about change, about people, about behavior, whatever all that stuff is. Just temporarily set it to the side while you engage, as you've said, as a 6-year-old with the content afresh.
Sarah?
I would just say, if you can treat the book a little bit like a fairground ride.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a few weeks, not a few minutes, but you get on it, you're going to be twisted and shaken a little bit, but it's going to be fun. And at the end of it, you're going to have a different perspective because you've seen things differently. Now, if you wanted to, you can just literally put the book down and go, thanks. Chances are you're going to want to explore a bit more, particularly in seeing what makes sense in life, business with it. But yeah, I'd say just like approach it as something that's fun and enjoy the ride, go with it, engage with it, like, lift your hands off the bar and scream and come out at the end going, yeah, I do see some stuff differently. And the infinite part is the exploring, like, what do I do with this now?
And also it occurs to me that for some people who are busy and strive is give yourself permission to read a book that may not at first look have a direct practical impact. I mean, it can change everything for the next 10 decades of your life, but it isn't like I can read one chapter and suddenly I'm going to implement an idea tomorrow. So, but give yourself permission to do what we don't normally do, which is to look at something which is foundational. And when I say permission, is give yourself the time to indulge, if it feels like that for people, in something that is going to be the new way of seeing lots of stuff, and be open to that, and the hit may not come on the first few chapters or whatever. It probably could do, but just allow yourself to do that, because the worst that could happen is you waste Was it £9.99? I don't know how much was the book. I don't.
£17.22 in paperback.
Right, you waste a few quid and you waste a bit of time. The best that could happen, listeners, is really everything could start to look quite different in life and work. Now, that's got to be worth a shot, hasn't it? It's a very easy way to dip your toe in.
For the sake of a few minutes a day and the way we've structured it, you can show up, you can do one exploration.
Yeah.
It's a few minutes a day.
Yeah.
A couple of months later,
Yeah.
And when you take all the pressure off of needing to do something with this, you tend to get the best actual results anyway.
Exactly. So give yourself permission just to hang out in it and enjoy the fairground ride. And you've also got, just to say to listeners, there's the audio resources, which is all the direct experience exercises, thought experiments broken down by little 5-minute audio segments, which is great as well. So some people love reading, some people like listening, or both. So it's not just a book.
Yes.
I mean that, I'll say that as my last part. I think it's not just a book in many aspects. Physically, it's not just a book, but all, in terms of it is. Yeah. So I really hope the book does phenomenally well, because it's right up my street, as you know, and I'm so glad you've written it, that you're better than I am at writing books. I seem to talk a lot, but I'm so glad this book exists, because I think it'll be helpful for people massively. So guys, thank you so much for A, writing the book, and B, coming and joining us on the podcast. And I'm assuming you'll be very happy for me to put all the details in the show notes and people to contact you. What's the best way to do that? Because I know you have many appearances on things. How do you like people to contact you?
So probably the best place is the home of the book, which is thoughtfulraven.co.uk. And that's the place where you've just referenced, Piers, where there's free resources, including those audios. Longer term, we'll also have a self-study course in there for those who prefer to have a bit more around the book. And that's where we'll first of all promote ongoing book groups. So we know that some people like that coming together. So where you said about indulging in the time, sometimes that permission is made more possible by, I'm going to a book group, I'm going to meet with people every week for this number of weeks. And it provides that structure, and it provides a bit like exercise classes, we're so much better.
It brings a social element, it brings a structure, it brings a sort of discipline to the time, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's the kind of main place to go to. And obviously, there you can contact us as well through there. Just to add as well, we've got a journal that goes with it. So both the book and the journal are available on Amazon. But the journal provides us a place to write what you're recognizing, what your questions are, what's coming up, all structured in alignment with the book, with the questions and with additional questions to help that journaling process, so that people can benefit from both aspects.
That's a little added tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, get curious, check the book out, and as always, we'd love to hear any feedback, comments, observations, challenges, insights, whatever. So as usual, have fun being curious, and catch you in the next episode.